Hello everybody, this is Poor Nilsson with Random Art Attack, and lately I've been playing a game called SNKRX, SNKRX, ? I know, horrible name, but fun game. In the game, you purchase different body parts, and these are like different classes. There's a cleric, a warrior, a rogue, etc. Anyways, I wanted to see if I could reproduce the creation and movement of this snake using different prefabs as body parts within Unity. So this tutorial, I will show you just that. Before we get started in Unity, let's first consider the problem and how we might solve it. So first, I'm thinking it makes sense to have a manager in which we can put all of these different scripts. Within this manager, it would take care of the spawning of the snake, it'd take care of controlling of the snake, and it would also take care of anything else that we need to do with the snake. For the actual creation of the snake itself, we could create a list within a script, and then simply have this list be a list of game objects that we want to instantiate as the different body parts. So we could drag and drop the different prefabs to this list, and then the code would go through and iterate through the list, instantiating each body part as it does, starting with the head and then going towards the tail. As we're iterating through this list, we can also add any needed code to the body segments as we instantiate them. And this seems pretty straightforward enough. Next, we can either instantiate all the body parts simultaneously and then just offset each additional body segment by predefined distance, or we could spawn each body part given enough time elapses. So basically, as time goes, we spawn another body part, then another, then another. Let's use this option as it gives a little bit more flexibility in potentially being able to spawn different body parts on the fly. Now, granted, you can do it any way you want. Here's just two examples that you might do. The movement of the head of the snake should be easy enough, requiring us to simply add a rigid body 2D to each spawn body segment, and then add a forward velocity to the front prefab. Remember, forward means to the right of 2D sprites. The code that we could use looks something like this. Now, this is going to be almost exactly the code that we use. Let's talk about this just bit by bit. So the first thing is we're going to have a list. We're going to probably call it snake body. So the first element, which we refer to as 0, is the snake's head. We then say get component rigid body 2D. That way we can access the velocity, hence dot velocity. So we're taking the head, we're taking the velocity, and we're changing it. So what we're doing is we're going snake body 0, so the head, dot transform dot right. So that means it's a forward velocity, it's going to the right, times speed, whatever that speed is, times time dot delta time, so that it iterates smoothly. This simple code will just move the snake forward. Easy enough. Next, we can handle the turning of the snake with a simple code. If input.getAccess, then there's a string, horizontal, is not 0. What this means is Unity has predefined keys. Horizontal is on a controller left or right. On the keyboard, it's also left or right, or A and D. And so as long as this isn't 0, it will go, okay, let's go to the snake body part 0, go to the transform, and then we'll just rotate it by a new vector. 0, 0, so it's not rotating on the X and the Y, but rather along the Z, which is coming out to the user. So we're doing a new vector 0, 0, comma, negative turn speed, so whatever that turn speed is, times time dot delta time. Again, this is changing how fast this rotates, and the time dot delta time is going to be how smooth, but then we're also going to times it by the input, so it will determine if it's going left or right. You have to do negative because for whatever reason, Unity's default has a camera behind the sprite, so there you go. And it's the negative turn speed instead of just turn speed. And this code will allow us to turn the snake. So we have a big picture of how we're going to manage a snake, how we're going to spawn the snake, how we're going to move and turn the snake, or at least the first body segment, the head. But moving the other body parts will be a little bit more difficult because you can't simply use the same movement script, because then they will be all instantaneously moving and turning at the same time, which isn't desirable. Let's look at what that would look like if I use the same script for everything. So you get something that looks like this, not very snake-like movement, if I do say so myself. So what could we do instead is have each body part have a script that basically tracks its location and rotation and gets a running list, a running trail of breadcrumbs, if you would. Then the body parts that come next can take this information and change their own position and rotation to meet this stored information, with obviously an offset, of course. Without some sort of delay or offset, you'd basically just have all the body parts group up together. Awesome, it feels like we know how to go forward. But before we jump into Unity, let me give a short shameless plug. All of my patrons of a silver tier or higher will get access to all the resources in this tutorial. So if you want to support me or if you want access to the different resources in this tutorial, I invite you to become a patron. Also, for those interested, I've created another channel and linked in the description below in which I give a short review of SNKRX, SNKRX. So if that interests you, you can go watch that too. All right, let's go ahead and jump into Unity and get this done. First, we're going to make the different body segment prefabs. So I have all these 2D images basically. What you want to do is you want to go into the inspector and you need to change it to Sprite 2D and UI. This will allow it to basically act as a sprite. You can then just drag it into the scene, you can add anything you want to it, and then just drag it back into this area here, and it'll create prefabs that you can move into the snake body parts. The background that we're going to be using is this checkered texture, and so what you want to do is change the texture type to Sprite UI, just like we did before, but the mesh type also needs to be full rect, R-E-C-T. What this does is it makes it so that you can tile it. You can then drag the background onto the screen and change the draw mode to be tiled, and then change it to whatever tiles you want. You can increase the number, you can decrease the number. I'm going to go pretty high. And now we have our prefabs and our background set, and it is as simple as that. Now we get to go ahead and dive into the coding. First, we're going to make that breadcrumb code, the one that takes the prefabs and logs the position and rotation of these different things. We call this code marker manager. So these different points, these different breadcrumbs are going to basically be markers. Instead of coding line by line, I will show you the code in chunks and explain it. That way you can kind of see the big picture. You can pause at any time, and I don't go too fast, I don't go too slow. And I will also try to show what the code does within the player itself from time to time. That way it's not hours of me coding. I'll do my best. So here, let's go ahead and do this. So go ahead and right click and then go to create C# script. Name that marker manager, or name it whatever you want, but for this tutorial, that's what we're going to call it. The name actually matters because we're going to be referencing this. So keep that in mind. If you don't use marker manager, it might be different than my code. All right, and now let's go ahead and jump into the script. You can double click that there. So here we have our public class marker manager, and I have added all of this code right here. So feel free to pause it, look through it, see if you can figure out yourself, but I'm going to go ahead and explain what all of this does. So this first bit, I'm creating a new class called marker. I'm not calling it a marker manager, it's just a marker. You can name it whatever you want. What this is going to do, think of it basically like an object with two variables on it. I'm going to have a marker that has position and it has a rotation. That way I can reference both those things. So within this public class, I have the two variables that are going to be in it. The first one is a vector3, which is position. And then I also have a public quaternion, which is the rotation. Now I'm going to create a way to create these different classes. So public marker, vector3 position is the first input, and the quaternion rotation is the second input. So if I want to make a marker, I just put in a position, I put in a rotation, and I set the position as the input, and I set the rotation as the input for the rotation, ROT. And this will create a marker. Now, after I have this done, I'm going to create a list of markers. So public list marker, I'm going to call this marker list, and this equals a new list marker. So I'm just starting this list basically. And so now I have a way to keep track of these markers that I've defined as a class. And then I can make a list of these markers. And then I'm going to be able to reference both the position and the rotation of these markers. I couldn't just create a list of positions and then a list of rotations, because if one of the lists even got off by one, everything would be messed up. So I'm just keeping them all within this marker class. Pretty cool. Right, next we want to add two functions, which I've already done. So past the start, past the update function, I have two functions. So this is the code I'm looking at right here. The first function is going to be a update marker list. And what this is going to do is basically, I'm going to iterate this within the update section and then add a marker to the list, from the transform. So this public function, the marker manager, I'm going to add this to every body segment of the snake. And then each of these body segments, every fixed update, will run the update marker list, which will add a new marker based on the transform position and the transform rotation to the marker list. So let me try and explain that a different way. Here we have a function. It takes the marker list, which is a list of all the different markers we have, and it's using the add function, which is going to add something to the list. And what we're adding is a new marker, and this new marker is found from the transforms position and the transforms rotation. So again, it's running the class setup that we set up right here. Okay, so this is just the update. And then we put it in the fixed update or the update, and we're going to update the marker list so it's growing, growing, growing. Now let's make a public function called clear marker list. What this does is it allows us to basically go through and clear the list, add a call of a function, and then add the current position. This is going to be used later in the code because we might want to, as we're instantiating these different things, just every once in a while just clean up the marker list if it's getting too bloated or we're afraid that it might become corrupted. We can just add this. So there's that function as well. And this basically constitutes the whole marker manager script. We're done. We can just basically now add this to the different body segments of the snake in a different code, and it will take care of keeping track of where it was and what was the rotation of the different body segments so that we can move the different body parts accordingly. Very cool, very straightforward. All right, next we're going to go back into our Unity scene, right click, create C# script. Let's name the script Snake Manager. And this will take care of the instantiation and movement of the snake. And all we need to do is add it to an empty. So right click here, create empty. I'm going to call this Snake Manager as well. All right, there we go. And then I'm going to drag and drop this script onto that manager. Now we're ready to go ahead and go in and start to edit this script as well. Here we are in the Snake Manager script. I've already added a little bit, and so we're going to talk about this. First 4 variables that I declared after the public class Snake Manager. So the first one, and I use serialized field. This allows it to still be a private variable, but that we have access to it within the inspector inside Unity. So serialized field, I made a float, which is speed. This is going to be the speed of the snake. I just set it to 280. I've played around with a lot of different things. You can play around with that yourself, figure out what works. Second, I did serialized field float, so another variable, turn speed. This is how fast the snake's going to turn. I'm going to change that to 180 because that's going to make it turn a lot sharper. Next, another serialized field list, game object, body parts. What this is going to be is a list of all the different body parts you want to spawn. I'm going to start off with only spawning the head so that we can play around with the movement, see if it works properly, but this is going to be the list that we're gonna basically tell what the snake is going to be made out of. And last, I'm going to do a list, game object. Notice this isn't a serialized field, snake body. Now what this is going to be, it's going to basically be a running list of the body of the actual snake. So after I instantiate from this list, I'll put it into this list, if that makes sense. All right, so let's go ahead and go to a start function. And within this function, I'm going to say game object temp. So it's going to be a temporary game object that's just going to be lost eventually. Instantiate. And so I'm going to instantiate a game object, its position, and its rotation, and basically the parent. So that's going to be the inputs of the instantiate function. So the first, you can see I'm putting in the body part 0. So this is going to be the head. This is what we put in the list up here. We're going to get the current transforms position, the current transforms rotation, and then we're going to set the transform as the parent. So remember, this transform is going to be an empty with the screen manager script that we've already made. So it's going to be wherever that is on the screen, this is where the snake's going to spawn. If this object that we just instantiated, .getComponent marker manager, does not exist, so that's the exclamation mark means not this, we're going to add a component marker manager. Simple as that. If rigid body 2D does not exist, then I add a component rigid body 2D, and then I also get that component once more, set the gravity scale to 0 so that the sprites aren't being affected by gravity. So all this does right here is basically spawns the head of the snake. Okay. Next, we're going to do snake movement. It's a new function that you create, so void snake movement. We take the snake body, which we haven't created yet, so we probably want to add it right here as well. Let me do that just a second. All right, so we've gotten the head of the snake of the body, and then we added it to the snake body list. Now, as we go to the snake movement function, you can see snake body is 0, we get the rigid body 2D, and then find the velocity. We set the velocity equals the snake body 0, so basically the heads transform going to the right, and then we times it by the speed, and then we times it by the time dot delta time. What that does is it makes it smooth as you move the snake. Now we want to make the snake movement in the update. Now this is really important. It has to be fixed update. It's going to have a lot of issues if it's just update. So go ahead and change that to a fixed update right here. And then we're going to put snake movement into this function as well, like I said. So fixed update and then snake movement. All right, that should do it for us. Now we can go ahead and build this, Control-Shift-B, and we'll jump into Unity and see how this works out. We've created movement, we've created a snake head spawner. It should be just great. Now that we're back in Unity, all you need to do is go ahead and drag and drop any prefab that you want into the body parts of the snake manager. So for example, that first element that I added is going to be the head of the snake. Now you can have as many body parts as you want, but it's only going to spawn this first one. We'll talk about how to do the other ones later. If you go ahead and hit play, we should see the snake moving in a straight line. There you go, to the right. And so our script is working. And behind the scenes, you don't see this. Let's go ahead and do this once more. I'll go ahead and pause this. Now, if you click on the snake manager, you can see that it spawned this. We added a rigid body 2D, gravity scale at 0, and there is also a marker manager. There you go. Pretty cool. It's working the way that it's supposed to be working. Okay, let's go to the next portion. Go back into the code for the snake manager. Here we go. So we've gone back into the snake manager script, and we've added this portion of the code in the snake movement function. So here's the top of the script. Go down. After we are moving the velocity, we are now saying if input.getAccess horizontal does not equal 0, and again, horizontal is the predefined value of the left or right keys or A or D by Unity itself. If it's not 0, then the snake body's head, 0 element, its transform.rotation is a new vector, which is 0, 0, so I'm not changing the X or the Y scale. But the Z scale is going to be negative the turn value times time.delta time times input.getAccess horizontal. Now, this value right here will alternate between negative and positive since the camera in 2D space, for whatever reason, basically makes it so that the Z-axis needs to be negative for whatever reason when rotating. So there we go. It's probably with the unit circle calculus, all that stuff. But this will turn the snake the way that you want to. Let's add a way to instantiate the rest of the snake as well. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Here we are back in the snake manager script. We've added 3 variables. Let's go ahead and talk about those. The first one is distance between. It is a float. It's serialized field so that the user can change that in the Explorer. What does this do? Well, what it does is it's not distance. It's going to be time in between spawning the different body parts, but for the user's experience, it basically equates to the distance between each body part. Next, we've added a float count up. We don't really need this. I don't think we use count, so just 2 variables, excuse me. So the float count up, basically I start the count at 0. Every frame I iterate it up based on the time that's elapsed, and if this count up equals to or is greater than this, then I spawn the body part. So those are the 2 variables I I create. We'll talk about some of the other changes in a bit, but let's go down to this function that we created. So here's the function, create body parts. Basically what this is going to do, it's going to manage the markers, and it's also going to manage instantiating the different body parts. That's it. So the first thing I say, marker manager, marker m, so a temporary variable within this function, equals snake body. So the body of the snake, not the, what was the variable that we used? Not the body parts, but the snake body that we're taking the body parts and adding to. Okay, so the snake body, and then we're going to say, let's use the snake body count, which is the size of the snake, and then -1. The reason I need the -1 is the count is going to be 1 bigger than the actual index of the tail. So here's how I index the tail of the snake body. I'm going to get the marker manager within the snake body. I'm going to say, okay, if count up equals 0, 0, I'm going to clear out the list. I'm going to clear out the marker manager of that snake body, the tail of the snake body. That way, I don't have any back information for whatever reason. It's clear, and it starts counting from the time it spawned, more or less. Now, I'm going to say, okay, count up plus equals time.delta time. So every time this function is run, it's going to iterate the time. It's going to be counting up. If count up is greater than or equal to distance between, meaning the distance between the body parts, that was the float that the variable that we made at the start, then it's going to basically instantiate the body parts of 0. Just like we did at the very start when we spawned the head, it's gonna create the head, but we're gonna also minus the different body parts, so it's always going to be 0. It's always going to be the very first element in that list. And so it might not necessarily be the head, it might be, you know, the third thing because we've already deleted 2 before it. We're going to put it at the position of the marker list. The marker manager, and then the list's position, the list's rotation. And again, remember, marker manager had a variable called marker list, and within that list there was a position, and within that list there was also rotation. So I'm instantiating these body parts at those marker managers of the previous, basically the tail of the snake, right? I'm then going to check if it has marker manager, check if it has a rigid body, add those two, set gravity equal to 0. All of this was the same as before. And now I'm going to take the snake body, I'm going to add this, I'm going to take the body parts, I'm going to remove this. This is very important. Basically, as the body parts spawn, it gets smaller and smaller, and then the snake gets bigger and bigger. Essentially just iterating through all of the body parts. I'm then going to say, okay, let's get the thing that we just spawned in, the marker manager, clear that out just to be safe, and then we're going to set the count to 0 so that it starts all over again. That is how we basically create the body parts. We're just iterating through this using time to do this. Okay, now where do we put this? Well, I put it in a fixed update. Just at the very start I say, if bodyparts.count is bigger than 0, just create the body parts. Simple as that. Now there's one last thing I want to do, and that's I'm going to take all of the functionality in the start where I create the head of the snake, and I'm going to put it right here in the create body parts. So if snake body part, if snake body.count equals 0, so I don't have a snake yet, I'm going to create a game object. I'm going to call it temp1 so it doesn't interfere with all of these different temps here. Temp1, instantiate the body part. Note, I'm doing it at the transform position and the transform's rotation, not the marker manager's position and location and rotation, okay? So I'm going to take all this, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to instantiate this, and if there's a marker manager, add a marker manager. If there's not a rigid body 2D, add it, gravity scale. Now there's one thing I do need to change. I need to make it so that I minus, again, basically just use this functionality right here, where I add it to the snake, and I minus it from the body parts. Okay, so now that my snake body isn't equal to 0 ever, and let's call this temp1, after it runs this, then it'll go into this code. So that what we can do is go up to the start function and basically just run create body parts one time, and it'll do everything that we need to do at the very start to create the snake. Let's go ahead and build this, Control-Shift-B, and go back into Unity and see how this works. All right, here we go. We're going to go ahead and build this and then play it. Well, it's already built, excuse me. So I'm going to hit play. Now you're going to notice a couple interesting things. Oh, sorry, as it holds on. The turning keys work, but it looks like it only spawned 2 body parts, right? Well, actually, if we pause this right here, we can see it spawned all of these, but it's not moving them. There's not a movement script for the other body parts. It's just the head that we move, remember? So we have the spawning done, we have the movement of the head done. Now the last part of this tutorial we need to do is move the body parts. So we're going to go back into our Snake Manager one last time, and this code will be the final pinnacle of everything. We'll get it to all move together. So let's do that right now. We are back in our Snake Manager. We will go ahead and again, I'm just skipping all this so you don't have to see me type this out, but we've added all of this code to our snake movement. Let's go ahead and go through this. It says if the snake body.count is bigger than 1, meaning it's more than just the head of the snake, because if it's just the head, we can just use this. Then we say, okay, for int I equals 1. Notice I'm starting at 1. I don't care about the head of the snake, I care about everything after it. So 0 is going to be the head, and 1 and everything after is going to be that. So when int I equals 1, I is less than the snake body.count, so it's iterating through all these, I++. Typical for loop, just going through all the different body parts. Marker manager mark M equals the snake body I minus 1. So I'm basically looking at the previous body part. So if I'm on body part 3, I'm going to look at the marker manager of body part 2, and I'm going to get that component. I'm then going to take the body part 3 or 4 or whatever, and then set its position equal to the marker manager's list's position of the very first element in that list. Remember how we have like this breadcrumb trail? So if it has 152 different markers in this list, I'm just going to set the position of my snake body to the first one. Set this rotation of my snake body to the first rotation. And then I'm going to remove that marker so that I can iterate through that marker list. That's it. This will basically go body part to body part, set it equal to the next marker manager's marker, remove that marker, and go down and then just keep doing this. This is the movement of the snake. We are done. We've created the snake. We've spawned the snake. It should be able to move. Let's hit Control B, build this thing out, and go back into Unity. Here we are back in Unity. The first thing we want to do is actually, instead of having all the body parts be red arrows, let's put different things in so that we can see if it actually spawns the different body parts, right? So the different prefabs. These could represent from SNKRX the different classes. And that would be easy enough if you had different classes just to pull those in. Let's do the distance between, let's do 0.4 just to see if it changes at all. Let's change the speed to be pretty slow so I have time to react for the tutorial. All right, moment of truth, cross your fingers. Is it going to spawn everything? Are we going to be able to control it? Is it going to move well? Here we go. And sure enough, look at that. We got functionality. It spawned all the different body parts. It's able to turn left and right. They're following, they're rotating accordingly. Let's try to change that to 0.2 distance between. And let's change this up to 280 like it was at the beginning. Try that again. Haha! Doesn't that make you feel good? We did it. All right. This tutorial was fun to make. I hope that you enjoyed it. Thumbs up really helps get the traffic to the site, makes me want to make more tutorials for you guys. Also, patrons from my Patreon, you get access to, if you're silver tier or higher, you get access to all the files that we've made in this. So all the different graphics and codes and things of that nature. Also, all my gold tier patrons, I'm going to be releasing an advanced tutorial either later today or tomorrow. That's going to be exclusive to them for about a month or so. And what that's going to be, it's going to be some advanced techniques where I take what we've done today and just build on it. For example, we're going to talk about how to dynamically add body parts on the fly so that you could make like a traditional snake game, or you could just grow or shrink your different snakes. So it's kind of cool. If you want access to that, consider becoming a gold patron. Like, subscribe, thumbs up, check out the other videos, leave comments below, all that good stuff. You guys are awesome. Have an awesome day. All right, bye.